This is the SQL Data Partners podcast, and my name is Carlos Chacon, your host. Today we wanted to talk about backups and restores. So Tim Radney, my guest, and I had a great conversation about this. Our conversation went a little bit long, and so we're actually going to break this conversation up into 2 episodes. Today's episode is going to focus mostly on the reasons for backups, the different types, and why we do them, of course. And then episode 4 is going to focus on some of the more advanced concepts as far as encryption, compression, and backing up into Azure. The folks at SQL Skills have made us a great offer, which we'll let you know at the end of the session. So we'll hope that you'll check that out. And we have a special offer going. We're actually going to be raffling off the book that Tim wrote about backup and restore options in SQL Server. So again, all that information will be coming at the end of both episodes. So we hope you check those out. Again, compañeros, welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Tim is a consultant with SQL Skills and has been awarded the Microsoft MVP Award. He's written a few books, and if you fancy a Twitter chat with him, you can find him at T. Radney. He hails from Fortston, Georgia, where he serves as the past chapter leader of the Columbus SQL Server Users Group. Tim, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thanks for being here. Ultimately, today we wanted to talk a little bit about backup and restore operations, primarily in SQL Server. This is going to be SQL Server focused. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show today, Tim, is that you have written not just one, but actually a couple of books on backup and recovery. Your most recent book is entitled SQL Server 2014, Backup and Recovery Techniques, and it is available from Amazon. I'm also super stoked to announce on our podcast that we are going to give away 5 copies of the book. If you'd like to register for your chance to win, you can go to sqldatapartners.com/podcast. And under the information for today's session, you can fill out the form with your email address with a chance to win. We will have the drawing on August 31st. So again, that URL is sqldatapartners.com/podcast, and you can register under today's program information for a copy of Tim's latest book. Today, our discussion will focus on backups. One of the things that we need to keep in mind, we need to keep the end in mind, right? So it would be incomprehensible for us to talk about backups without first talking about recovery, right?
That's exactly right.
So while we do take backups, we take them so we can recover. And so there are the 2 little acronyms, I guess, that we'll go over quickly about recovery is RTO and RPO. And so I guess I'm curious, Tim, so I guess when we talk about these acronyms, first let's define them. So RTO is your recovery time objective.
Correct.
Right? So how long you think you are going to take to get back up.
Correct.
Right. And then your RPO is your recovery point objective, right? Or to what point are you going to be able to get to, right? In the event of a disaster or what have you.
Right. I like to tell people to think about a recovery point objective as how much data can you afford to lose? So your point in time, is that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, to put it in perspective. And unfortunately, when we talk about recovery time objective and recovery point objective, everybody says immediately, 0 downtime, 0 data loss, which
that's right.
Is fine. Give me $10 million and we'll start talking.
Sure.
That's really hard to hit, but you can usually land on something reasonable and build your recovery strategy from there.
Right. So that's an interesting point, right? Is that you will need to set up your backup recovery. So again, you can recover, which we mentioned, and you'll want to talk about all the things that will be needed for you to be able to get to those points. Lots of different features that are available to give you highly available data, but they don't necessarily come free. And so having those discussions and being able to understand what your business requirements are, and then what they're willing to pay for, or potentially even change their business processes if they need to so that they can be able to recover or take care of some of that recovery if needed, I think is also in play.
Yep.
So how do you, I guess, go about, any thoughts on going about in with discussions of the business of how to set these up?
Absolutely. And it all starts with determining what is their recovery point objective and recovery time objective. So knowing what the business requirements are and what they need in the event of a disaster or in the event of some oops type situation, an update statement without a where clause.
Right.
That could be considered a disaster. I mean, if you just trash the entire sales table, your business is down. I mean, that's a critical point. So depending on your HA technology, I mean, if you're doing an availability group or mirroring type situation, well, that update statement was ran against both nodes. So what can you do at that point? What's a restore operation? So for disaster recovery, if your data center were to go dark or become a smoking hole in the ground, how quickly do you need to be up in a secondary location? What is your kind of appetite for having that secondary location and the technologies there, and how are we going to get the data there type thing? And based upon those business requirements will dictate what your backup strategy should be, because your backup strategy mimics your recovery strategy. It all comes back to what does the business require? And I say require, not want. What is the regulatory requirement for that?
And ultimately, part of our discussion is we want to be able to provide the ability to get back. If they may not be necessarily happy with the time it takes to get there, but we always wanted to be able to provide a way to get back. And kind of a lesson 101. So it's funny, actually, and his name is escaping me, but the fellow who started Code School, which is now part of Pluralsight as well, he tells a story about he was a developer, well, he is still a developer, and tells a story about a script that he was going to run on the database for a company he was working for. He knew it was going to take a little while, and it was an update to all of the contact table for this application. And the organization was mp3.com at the time, right? So they had several million contacts in there, right?
Oh, wow.
And so he didn't have time to do it during the day. So he's like, okay, well, I'll just let the script run at the end of the day, and I'll check it when I get home. Well, he didn't check it that Friday evening, right? So then Saturday evening rolls around. He logs in and he says, I don't see my changes. My script says that it ran, but I don't see the changes that I thought would be in there. Let me run it again. So he runs it again, forgets to check back in on it, right? Comes in on Monday morning, and they have kind of this all hands meeting. And the manager says, so someone ran a script this weekend that updated every single email address in the contacts table on Friday. So the DBAs were in here all day Saturday restoring the database. And they had some issues with the restore process. It wasn't quite there, so they lost a little bit of data. And then somebody ran it again on Saturday night.
Oh, wow.
He's like, can somebody tell me who did that? And he's like, please not me, please not me, please not me. And he goes back to look at his code, and sure enough, no where clause. And so that was an example of, right, always having a fallback plan there.
That's right. We always like to say it's not a matter of if it's going to happen to you, it's a matter of when you're going to do that. When you're going to you think you're in dev and you're in production, and we try to segregate access and rights and things, but you get one of these drive-by, you walk by your cube, distracts you, you turn around, you execute, you're in the wrong screen. Stuff happens. And even real world, an ETL process, you get a bad file, but it's not the file structured correctly. So all your checks, pass.
Right.
All your little SSIS little widgets turn green, and it ingests this data, and it's really bad data. It's just mush. And if you don't
need to get it out.
Right. And if you don't have an easy way of identifying that this was the data that was new, if it was a merge into a whole bunch of different dates and you don't have an insert date or something you can trigger off of, how do you get back? You got to restore back to a point in time. And So having the ability to do that is crucial.
And I have to tell a story on myself. I was working with some healthcare data, and in a scenario where they wanted me to help to cleanse the data, right? So all the females would become Mollies, all the males become Matts, and change the address information, for example, so that they can then present this in their demos and when they're looking at other clients. Just like you said, I was developing this in test, right? Everything was fine. Somehow my connection switched. To this day, I have no idea how that happened, and I ended up going against production, ran the ran the data manipulation, and all of a sudden in the database, all the women were Mollies and all the men were Matts. And so yeah, talk about embarrassing. So luckily, I guess the one tip I will give there is that once that I had identified what I had done, I immediately found out how many instances, which luckily in this case was just one, it was affected, and then I immediately took action by notifying the team.
Yeah.
Right. The worst thing you could do, right, is then try to cover that up somehow or wait for somebody else to notice. That would not be good.
Yeah, that's a CLM, a career limiting move.
That's right.
Trying to cover up. I mean, data professionals were supposed to have certain levels of integrity and honesty and things, and being able to raise your hand and say, "It was me. This is what I did. It was an honest mistake. Let's get this fixed." And
right.
Once people like myself and you and others have that moment, it's that win. We're so much more alert and aware of what we're doing in production. So that's like a coming to age type moment. If you're going to hire a junior DBA and they've never had that moment, guess what? They're going to have it with you.
And so you want to be prepared.
That's right.
So that takes us into, I guess, the different steps that we can take to be prepared. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the recovery models. Now, I'm counting 7 options that we've got. So we've got full, partial, differential, file group, file, logs, and copy only. Okay, so let's go through and question. How often are you normally taking full backups of your databases?
I typically do fulls. I'll do a weekly full and daily differential.
So that's out of the gate. You'll do that?
Yep.
Interesting. I guess I tend to be a little bit, pessimistic, or, I guess I have been an advantage to have lots of space. So normally in the beginning, I'm taking full backups every night. And,
yep.
Then when you decide to do something else, right? I think some of that may be a matter of style. Size of the database, I think, plays in there.
Yeah. Size definitely plays into it. Also, a lot of my clients are 24/7, type shops.
Sure.
And backing up across the wire to a network type device, doing the same full backup every night, you're backing up so much data that has not changed. So you can decrease the amount of your backup size by doing differentials during the week. And then in that, we're doing weekly full, daily differential, and then log backups at some small interval, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
Doing that, you drastically cut down your backup time. You cut down the size of them. Your restore may take slightly longer, since you do have to restore a full and then a differential. But in most cases, those differentials are just gigabytes in size. So you're talking minutes. But then
right.
the time during the week, the overhead, the I/O from having to do constant full backups. And again, if I'm dealing with a client and their databases, their largest one is 10, 15, or 20 gig, then okay, a nightly full would be okay. But a lot of my clients, we're dealing with hundreds of gig to terabyte size databases,
right.
And doing a nightly full of a multi-terabyte database is
not feasible.
Just not efficient.
Right. So you mentioned then breaking that up. So ultimately, I think the size of the database and normally the time that it takes to do that backup, when I look to change from doing fulls, is that if I'm generally doing one file, then I'll try to do a full backup to multiple files. And then if I can't fit it within my window of time that I want those backups to take place, then that's when I start looking at the differentials. And so one of the pieces about that differential, as you mentioned, is that so the differentials will take backups of everything that's happened up to the last full.
Correct. Yep.
And
yeah, the differential does not reset the differential bitmap, only a full backup. So yeah, it's not an incremental. It's not everything that's changed since the last differential. It's everything that has changed, since the last full. So over the course of the week, as data continually changes, your differentials would increase in size until you take that next scheduled full backup.
We mentioned the log backups, right? And interesting that you mentioned, so smaller increments, right? So with our full and a differential, we talked about doing that so once daily, generally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we get into our logs, and you mentioned 5 to 15 minutes. It's interesting. I run into a lot of places where they will set a log backup. They tend to do it in even hours at a time. I've seen like 4 hours.
Right.
Now, again, so some of this goes back to the recovery models that we talked about, but I find that it's not. I want to err on the side of caution and want to take my log backups more frequently than every couple of hours.
Yes. More frequent log backups give you a smaller granularity of data loss. So you're decreasing the potential for data loss. It's also maintaining the log more efficiently. So the more frequent that you do the log backups, the more frequent the transaction log is truncated. So you get the reuse of the VLFs. So the smaller that log you could potentially be. If you're doing it every 4 hours, where it's maintaining 4 hours worth of logging activity. If you're doing it every 15 minutes and you have transactions that don't really span longer than 15 minutes, then the log should be relatively smaller. So there's additional benefits other than just your recovery time or recovery point objective in having more frequent log backups.
Sure. My experience has been that I don't save any disk space by increasing my log time, right? So if I do 4 backups an hour at every 15 minutes or 1 every hour, the log sizes are basically the same, right?
Within reason. So if you take a log backup every 4 hours, then over 8 hours you've used X number of megabytes or gigabytes versus 8 hours worth of log backups every 15 minutes. It's still roughly the same amount of data churn. Now, the more frequent the backups, you still have a little bit of header information and things like that. So,
sure.
Bytes worth of redundant or additional data. But for the most part, the logging activities should be within reason, about the same.
Right. With our disk space today, right? Those bytes are insignificant, right?
Right.
And so the last one there. So I guess the lesson there, or my thought there, is that if you're unsure about how often to take your log backups, go with more frequently.
Right. If you ask the customer how much data can you afford to lose, they're going to say none. So right. Unless you've negotiated, and it's some special case with a system where they can go and reload files because the database is really just loaded from some ETL process and they can redo that work, then there's really no reason to have very wide, long durations in between log backups. So from your perspective, if you've got a standard and your standard is every 15 minutes and they're telling you, well, every hour would be okay, why change it? Be the hero. Right. Do more frequent backups.
That's right. I agree there. And then the last one is the copy only. So this one, the copy only, is ultimately a full backup, right? Where we don't want to break that chain.
That's typically where it's taken more frequently. You can a copy only with a differential is still just a differential bit backup because it still isn't going to reset the differential bitmap. But where the copy only is crucial is when you're doing fulls with differentials. If you were to make a full backup without a copy only, now every differential after that full, those diffs belong to that full. That one-off full backup you just made is its base. So if you go to restore you're full from, say, Sunday, but somebody made a full on Tuesday, and then you go to apply the differential from Thursday against the full from Sunday, it's not going to work.
Right.
If you had made that full on Tuesday with copy only, it's not going to reset the bitmaps. So it's as if that full never really happened. So it's a good practice to get into if you're in an organization that does differentials and you're making a one-off backup that is not part of your recovery plan or your normal sets of backups that you are going to use that to restore. Always use copy only.
So is that fair? I think I see that more. You talk about your backup strategy. I think I see that more if you're using a third-party tool to do your backups. I think if you're using SQL Server and you're through maintenance plans or a job, and you are storing this copy-only backup in the same place, you may be okay. But it's usually if you're using like a Veritas or Symantec, something to do those backups, then it doesn't know about that backup, and that's what we want to use, a copy only. Is that a fair assessment there? Yeah,
I think where you're going is there's folks that are doing like VM, or they have VM snapshots or something going on if it's a virtual machine where it's also taking backups. I've seen some of those systems use copy only so it doesn't interrupt the DBA's process. So if you're using native SQL Server backups or a database maintenance plan to do yours, that some of these third parties will use with copy only so that they don't disrupt your recovery strategy.
Right. Okay. So those are the backup types, right? Each of the databases can have them. Any special consideration for backing up the system databases, right? So we've got master, MSD, model, and TempDB.
Yes, for master, model, MSDB. MSDB, a lot of folks, they don't think about the system databases. They think they can restore or install SQL Server, restore their user databases, and they're good to go. Or if you're not backing up MSDB, then you just lost all your DTS or SSIS packages if you store those there. Right. So I don't know how many people memorize or take screenshots or have everything fully documented for every single job that's running, and as well as those complex SSIS packages.
Right, and all the security is associated with them.
Right, and I've had people say, well, we have those in source control. Fantastic, good for you. Are you sure that the version that's running on your server was the last one checked in? Things like that. So play it safe. Back up MSDB. Master is another one. That's where all your users and permissions and things are.
Sure.
If you were to restore your databases to a new clean instance, your applications aren't going to be able to connect because the users aren't there. And the last thing you want to be doing is trying to scrounge and figure out, what AD groups had rights and what were the levels of permissions and the local SQL accounts. Having master backed up is a good thing, but you can also script out all your users and permissions so that you don't really have to worry about restoring master. And in order to restore master, you have to have the exact same revision of SQL Server. So if you're running 2008 R2, 10.50 and those 4 digits, you have to be at the same level to restore master. So I always encourage folks, still have it backed up, but also script out your users and permissions so that you're not having to fight and get to the same patch level to restore master just to get those logins. Model, SQL Server can't start up without model. But TempDB, my favorite kind of interview question is, how often should you be backing up TempDB?
In fact, your book threw me for a little curve there. There's a little section heading on backing up TempDB, and I thought, what could be there?
Right. And the thing is, you can't, even though it's an option. You can go and try to back it up. It's going to throw an error. So that's always a fun one. So in interview questions, talk about how critical TempDB is and some settings around it and things, and then say, so since it's such an incredible, useful database, how often should you be backing that up? Oh, every 15 minutes. We replicate it and put it in an availability group.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see. Yes, I think along with that master database, is it kind of being the the brain, if you will, of that. You mentioned scripting those out, and I think that if you're in a fairly static environment, that may work for you. I think most places, however, the documentation around the instances and any changes that have happened since the last script. It's just not there. It's not a strong infrastructure, if you will.
Mhm.
So yeah, go ahead and take that opportunity to back it up.
Right.
It can be a little cumbersome to get that back, but always better to be able to go back and know you've got it than not.
Absolutely. And there's various things where you can repair master and things like that. But sometimes in those emergency repair options, you're going to end up trashing. It's going to rebuild master. You're still going to lose those logins. Now the organizations that I've worked at in the past, a large regional bank, all of our instances, every single night we would script out the logins and permissions. So yeah, somebody,
wow. Okay.
One person might have changed a local SQL account password during the day, but out of the one or two that might have done that from the hundreds that were on the server, okay, I can triage that. I don't want to be triaging 1,000 people.
Fair point.
So yeah, I mean, a SQL agent job, output it, save the results of the SP help rev login sproc to a file, store it in the same location that you store your databases, and dude, that's part of your recovery plan. Auditors, examiners, they love that stuff.
There you go. So you made an interesting observation there, and that is the SP_help rev login. And so just to take a second, that stored procedure ultimately available, I think, through like the Microsoft support.
Mm-hmm.
What that enables you to do is to script out with a hashed, encrypted password all the information that you need about a user, so that when you recreate it on a second instance, for example, it will be just like it was on the first instance. And all of that database information and security will be inherited, if you will. And you don't have to worry about orphaned users and things like that, which can be a pain. So I know that, it's a little bit more, I guess I use it more often in moving environments, upgrading or, things like that. But I guess it could be helpful in your recovery there. And you mentioned you would use that in your nightly processes or in your recovery processes?
We'd have a job, a scheduled job that would run, that would output that to a text file, store it in the location that we would have our databases, which was, all encrypted and protected and things. But yeah, nightly process. And then if we had to stand up a server in our DR site, from the backup device that was replicated to our DR, we would have instances that were there, but we wouldn't have to worry about restoring master. We just run the script. We had the process that would run would first drop all logins and then run the script to add all the logins back. And just in case from in between DR tests and things that passwords had changed, the user already exists, so it wouldn't be updating the passwords. We'd just drop logins, add the ones back, restore our user databases, restore MSDB, which restoring MSDB is like any other user database. There's no tricks or gotchas.
Yeah, it's very straightforward.
So restore the user databases in MSDB, and we're up in DR with minimal DBA interference. Actually, we had the restore procedures where any admin could have access to the server, could run the PowerShell script that would do all this stuff for us. So it was almost 100% automated.
Very nice.
And wasn't too much to it.
Yeah, very good, very good. I think that obviously that you want to get there over time, right? But to be able to do that even through starting off with maintenance plans, go there first and then look at scripts. And you even mentioned your PowerShell scripts. Okay, and I think we should mention here. Ultimately, this is all about, I guess you could call it a chain, right, or this data chain, and we want to be able to get all of the pieces or sections of all the transactions that happen against our database. We want to be able to collect all of those and keep them together to be able to restore back to that point where we want. And
right, yeah.
And we use these different methods in order to help ensure that we have all of the pieces or the links in the chain together.
Yep, the LSN.
Yes. Okay, compañeros, that's going to do it for us today. We are going to check out the offer from SQL Skills and then wrap up. Of course, next Wednesday, episode 4 will be available. We will finish up the conversation with Tim about backups. Thanks again for tuning in. The SQL Skills team has been very generous in offering a code to each one of you for 30 days of free training videos from their team, right? So what you need to do is to email Paul Randall at paul@sqlskills.com with the subject line, user group Pluralsight code is what you need to put in the subject line, user group Pluralsight code. And to get a free trial, you'll get 30 days and you'll have access to all of the SQL Skills content that is on Pluralsight. And again, you can mention in your email that Tim sent him your way, and he'll be happy to get that information out there. Now, Tim, you were mentioning that there are how many hours of video are available?
I want to say it's like 170 to 180 hours. I mean, there's close to 40 courses, lots and lots of good content.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine that is lots of deep dive stuff, particularly if the SQL Skills folks are known for their deep dive training. Do you have any courses on Pluralsight? I failed to check.
Working on one now on consolidation, best practices and techniques. So hoping to have that kind of wrapped up in the next 30 to 60 days.
Okay, very good. I know those can take a long time.
It's amazing how much time goes into putting together your slide deck and then doing all the recording. I mean, it's if you thought user group and SQL Saturday sessions, past summit sessions were intense, I mean, the Pluralsight, because you want to have it perfect and just right. I mean, it's a labor of love.
SQL Data Partners.